We are coming off of a discussion understanding the essence of the layers of fear of Hashem, the layers of fear that a person should have, an awe of Hashem, which really creates a foundation for a proper relationship, which means we're talking here about the awe that sets up our relationship with Hashem in the proper context, who we are, who Hashem is, so to speak, and that sets a relationship. And we explained in general that there are two very basic or very different levels of awe of God, the higher level and the lower level. The lower level came from a recognition of how grand and great the world was, and therefore knowing that Hashem is bigger than that, an awe of God. And the second one came from a recognition of how great God is and how insignificant the world is, and how the world in comparison to God is so tiny and insignificant, and that created an awe. In other words, one started off from self and built, I am here and God is even bigger than that, so to speak. And one is, God is so great that I am so insignificant. Two different ways to interact and relate to Hashem in a sense of awe. In chapter 43, we now began talking about two different ways to express our love or have a love to Hashem. And first we mentioned briefly the love of Hashem that comes from an absolute sense of non-existence, an absolute sense that not that there is a God and there is myself, meaning I exist and I love God. There is no longer a I and a God. It's all meaning I am part of God. I am not something that loves God. I lose my own identity. I lose my own existence completely. And this was something that was explained very similar to the idea of the higher level of awe, that the awe is based not on understanding our position and understanding that God is bigger, but losing our own identity. And the same thing is found within love. There's a love of God that comes not because God is bigger than me and greater than me, as we'll see in today's class, but rather I don't begin to have an identity outside of God. And therefore, it aroused within me a love because I realized all of my essence doesn't exist outside of God, meaning I am God. I don't have an identity outside of God. That's what we explained last week. Today we're going to examine the more applicable, when I say applicable, I mean the type of love that all of us should be able to relate to and should be able to achieve and acquire this relationship. And this is what's called Ahavas Olam. The higher level of love, Ahava Rabba, we said there are three things about it that are unique. And we're going to see in Ahavas Olam, the lower level of love, it's the converse of these three things. What were these three things? We said number one, Ahava Rabba, the high level of love, is not a love of flaming passion and excitement. On the contrary, it's a very quiet pleasure. It's cold like water compared to fire. It is a quiet, very, very significant and authentic pleasure. That was one aspect of it. And we gave, by the way, the metaphor, if you remember, that we said the difference between somebody who was around somebody for a long time and the relationship doesn't require a passionate relationship. Where's the excitement? I don't need excitement. It's something much more beyond excitement. It's deeper. It's more real. It's more part of me. And the metaphor we gave about a wealthy man who was enjoying his, croissant or his delicious coffee and Danish, the high-end pastry, versus the poor man who's never seen it before. The poor man is slurping and making so many noises when he eats his Danish because it's such an exciting thing because it's something new to him. Whereas the rich man, the guy who's used to it, it's a quiet, satisfying, enjoying with a fork the coffee and his pastry. What's the difference? By the rich man, this pastry is part of him, and the proof is take it away. The poor guy, okay, I didn't have it. I don't have it anymore, fine. The rich man, excuse me, that's my pastry. What's it? Meaning to him, it's part of him. It's somebody who has a relationship when they're far from somebody they love. A child who's far from their parent feels the passionate love. I miss my mom, I miss my dad, I miss my sister, I miss them. If you're home the whole time, you may not feel it. But when you're young at that stage, you may not feel it because you don't appreciate it. But a couple that's together for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, they don't sense an excitement, not because, God forbid, there's a lack of love. On the contrary, We passed that early immature state of it has to be passionate and exciting. We just enjoy sipping tea together. We enjoy sitting outside and watching the sunset together. We don't need to be in a state of excited passion at each moment. It's a much more deeper sense of oneness when the couple becomes one. That's Ava Rabba. Avas Elam, so that's the first stage where it's not a passionate love, but it's a pleasure. It's just a pleasure to sit and be together. The second stage is you cannot earn it. The type of love, we're talking about the higher level, you cannot earn it. You can't say, I'm going to work very hard and I'm going to awaken that love. No, you can't, because that love doesn't come from within yourself. It comes as a gift from above. Because it comes as a gift, it's not something you could earn and develop. You can't say, I'm going to develop this feeling. As long as you develop a feeling, you're working in the lower level. I am developing a feeling. The gift and the concept of the higher level of love is something that can't be developed. It comes as a gift. And that's a very important thing to know, because as the average human being, it's not a gift we can just have. And therefore, we shouldn't feel bad or feel disappointed if we're not there, because we're not a tzaddik. This is what tzaddikim, this is what righteous people, this is what Moshe Rabbeinu felt, the Rebbe, the Baal Shem Tov, David HaMelech. These are great people feel this. As a matter of fact, there's a very fascinating talk of the Alter Rebbe. We're going to come in about 4 or 5 weeks. We're going to come in a portion of the week. We're going to read the story of Yosef when he was sold down to Egypt. I want to come to the story of the brothers. And they finally bring Benjamin down to Egypt with them. And we find a very interesting story where Yosef takes his silver goblet. If you remember the story from the Chumash, and he hides it in Benjamin's sack. The Alter Rebbe has such a beautiful, beautiful insight into the story. He says, what's happening here? So it says in Kabbalah that Yosef is the origin, the soul of all tzaddikim. Benjamin is the origin and the soul of all Beinanim, the average Jew. I mean, in the high, obviously Benjamin has reached the perfect Beinani level, but the average one of us, we could be a Beinani, theoretically. It says Yosef had within him the word for silver, kesef, is the same word as nichsef. It's a love. The word kesef, same as the word love. Nichsef, nichsafti, you have a yearning love. It says Yosef felt that I know I'm the soul of a tzaddik, but even the soul of a Beinani deserves this love. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take my thing and hide it within his package, which means you'll discover it and find it. There are times that even a Beinani could discover high levels of love, but it's a gift also from above. In other words, Yosef putting the silver goblet in Benjamin's sack was the act of the high tzaddik giving a gift to the Beinani of this chance to experience a real sense of love. But in any case, the third aspect of this love, the higher level of love, is that it could only come after you have true yira, true fear of God. Not necessarily the highest level, but a high, sincere level of love of God. Of fear of God. You must first have serious yira. Now, this doesn't mean that it's earned. There's a difference between earning something and deserving something. And I'll explain to you just an example. If somebody works for $10 an hour or $50 an hour, they earned that money. If someone gets a bonus or a tip, it could be you deserve it, but you didn't earn it. You can't say, I demand it. You can't demand it because you didn't earn it. You could say that if a person works hard, they'll get a tip, they'll get a bonus. It's a gift. So while it's true that it comes only as a gift from God, but it has to be something you deserve. And that's a very interesting thing about the higher level of love has these three components. It's a calm pleasure love. It does not come through earning it. It comes as a gift, but you have to deserve it, and that comes only after fear, proper fear. Today, we're going to begin examining the next type of love, and this is the love that we can all achieve, and it's Avas Elam. And because it's achievable, the Alter Rebbe is going to tell us the meditation. There's a meditation that we can do to come to this place. Just to appreciate, before I go into, I see Karen's waiting here, sorry. Before I explain this meditation, you see, when somebody goes to recognize that somebody is much greater than you and much bigger than you, it could cause two reactions. One reaction is to have awe and fear. You recognize, for an example, someone is a great, powerful king, someone is a great, powerful, strong person, or very, very, whatever the person might be. It can arouse within you fear, or can arouse within you love. It depends how you approach it. Sometimes you see someone so great, and this is my father, this is my mother. I arouse in a love. Sometimes you recognize it's so great, and yes, it's my father and mother, but they're so great. So the emphasis, how we interact and translate the greatness, could either give us a greater level of love or a greater level of awe. And the truth is, they're really not separable. They require each other. As we'll see later in this chapter, we'll get to it today, hopefully. If the love comes without proper awe, even the lower level of law, even the lower level of love, if it doesn't have some awe first, it's called a gluttonous love. What's a gluttonous love? It's all about me. If I see a really good piece of chicken or steak or French fries or coffee, at the end of the day, it's all about me. So the true love is really a combination of the awe and the love coming together. But that requires a certain meditation, which the Alter Rebbe is going to introduce right now, a very practical meditation that we can do. And it brings us to the lower level of love. And just to remember, whenever we say in Tanya, higher level and lower level, good and not so good, if we can get to the lowest levels, we're doing pretty good. The Alter Rebbe is starting with a very high bar, and we're trying to relate to it on a level that we can, the best as we can. So when he says the lower level, it's not so low. Okay, we're about halfway down the page. The first word on the line is ach. Ach means but. Ach, avas olam. The lower level of love is called avas olam. Avas olam, as we'll discover in the later chapters of Tanya, can be translated two ways. Either olam meaning eternal, and now that's not what we're using it right now. Later we're going to talk on a higher level of, see, even avas olam, we're going to explain in two levels. But now we're not explaining it olam as eternal, like olam ved, forever, but olam meaning from the world. The love starts from within us, from within our world, from within our existence. It comes from tvuna and das. If you remember, there's really three things. There's chachma, there's bina, and there's das. Chachma is the first stage, the conception, the initial spark, initial seed that starts something. Bina is the development of an idea, and das is application. We're not saying chachma here because chachma was really, as we said before, something that focuses on nothingness. You remember what we said 2 or 3 weeks ago? Chachma is koyach ma. It is the idea that we come from nothing. Because if we think about it, we'll go back to this metaphor a couple of times. Chachma and bina and das are understood as the metaphor of creating a child. Chachma is that initial seed that comes from the man. Bina is a development of that in the mother's womb. And das is the application, how it comes into a final practical applied. Or an idea, it's easy to understand. There's the initial kernel of the idea, there's development of the idea, and relating to the idea. A difference would be if you're studying, well, let's say an example, by the way, a great example today would be about the elections. If somebody lives in another country and doesn't really care about the elections, he just finds it fascinating. He doesn't really care. It's fascinating to see who wins and who doesn't win. If somebody cares about it and lives in this country or cares about it, it matters to me who wins because I believe this person's better, this person's worse. So das means, it means something to me, this idea. It's not just some philosophical abstract idea, it's personal. Whereas chachma is the initial dat and bina is a development. So therefore, when it comes to the lower level of fear, we can't start with chachma. Even though it all comes from chachma, we start with bina because bina is where we get involved. Just to remind you of one of the laws of the reality of chachma is chachma doesn't come through hard effort. Chachma is like a gift that comes from within. You had a question? No, chachma comes from within. Within means I have deep in my soul the power of intellectual thinking and processing. Sometimes from deep within my soul, a spark would come forth, an idea. That idea, that novel new perspective doesn't come from my developing something. That is something I have to develop. That is an idea, a kernel of an idea. So that's how we develop a very high level of fear. Here we're talking about developing a lower level of love, and it starts with the second and the third of these three cognitive powers, which is bina, which is as known as tvuna. Whenever we say tvuna, we're really referring to bina in an undeveloped state. It's how the child is found within the womb, really. But tvuna here means bina, development of an idea, and das is application. The godless Hashem ain't safe baruch hu. We have to think and develop an appreciation for God. So we're going to divide up our appreciation of God in 3 layers. Layer 1 is called mamali, and this idea is good to know in general, the 2 words mamali and seviv. Hashem has 2 general ways how he relates to the world. One is called mamali. What does mamali mean? Mimali means I lower myself down to modify myself for each recipient. It's like a teacher who tutors different children. A tutor who teaches different children. Let's say you have a brilliant teacher who really is a college level or even higher, the college professor's professor, a very brilliant scholar. But now today he's giving a course for college students. Tomorrow he's giving a course for high school students. The next day for elementary school. Then he's talking to kids in the preschool. Each level that he speaks to, he'll modify his information to fit that person. That's one thing called mamali. That Hashem modifies, so to speak, his shine or blessing or energy or ray into the world based on the recipient. In the Garden of Eden, it's one level of light. In the heavenly spheres by the angels, another level of light. In the physical realm, it's another level. In the shul, it's one level. Next up here at tefillin, it's something else. When you're talking to a piece of steak, it's something else. To a stone, every different creation receives a different and modified and limited amount of light based on its identity. That's called mamali. So the first thing to think about is how God gives every single creation its needs based on its design and its ability to function. Hashem gives that level of light. The higher level is seviv. It's almost like if Einstein was giving a lecture and the room was filled with all different types of people, from elementary school to college age, to advanced, undergrads and higher. And he's giving a lecture and he can't modify it to each person. So he just gives a lecture. It's almost like a podcast. Whoever understands, whoever doesn't, you figure it out. I'm just saying my thing. In other words, it's like the sun. It's a much higher level. The sun doesn't shine differently if it's shining into a jewelry store or into a garbage dump. The sun shines the same because it doesn't modify itself for each recipient. That's the higher level of God's interaction with the world. That is, that God is energy and light and creative power doesn't modify itself. It doesn't even consider the recipient. The recipient is not part of the equation. I don't modify myself to fit you. It's the same for everybody. And therefore, on this level, this is used a lot of times, by the way, in a human body, we use the metaphor, the difference between life force and life abilities. In other words, you have a life force that keeps your body alive. That's the part of the soul that your eyeball, your brain, and your toe are equally alive. There's no difference. They're both alive. All three of them are alive the same way. Then you have, that's like the seviv. It's just the same for everything. The sun. And then you have the level where it modifies. You can't compare the level of life force found within the eyeball to the heel of your foot, or the brain, or the lungs compared to your finger. In other words, there's the mamali aspect and the seviv aspect. That's the first part of the meditation. To realize that Hashem is greater than the world to modify himself to each receiver. That's mamali. And then the level that Hashem surpasses all that. He's greater and doesn't even take any of the world into consideration and just shines. That's Soviv, a much higher level of revelation, a much higher level of Hashem's presence in this world. Then you have the third level. The third level is Kulei Kalei Chashiv. It doesn't even matter. The whole world doesn't count. It doesn't even make it up onto the scale. It's like looking from a couple light years up or a couple million miles away in space and looking at the Earth. No one takes into consideration the ants. They don't even make it onto the scale. They don't even make it onto the screen. It's not like I'm shining to a certain level more or less or the same. There's a certain point where the tiny insignificant changes don't come onto the, don't even count at all.
Moshe, can you please, mute that person?
Let me just see if I can find out who it is. All right, well, it stopped anyway. Okay.
Okay.
So, here. So this level is where the world doesn't even become a factor in the entire experience of God's relationship to the world, which means the world is not even on the scale, doesn't even make it to the sheet, doesn't even make it to the discussion. It's like, for an example, if you have a couple tiny, let's say teeny tiny insects examining and standing around one droplet of water from the Atlantic Ocean, and these tiny insects are looking at the tiny droplet of water and thinking, wow, look how big this water is. It's bigger than our house. It could drown 1,000 of us. It's these tiny little, insects. And to the ocean, that droplet of water, he didn't even notice it was missing. It's not like I'm not modifying myself how to interact with the world. You don't even make it to the thing. I'm so much bigger, so much grander. You don't even come up on the scale, on the scene, on the screen. And that's the third level to recognize and see how great Hashem is. First of all, he's able to provide the level of Amali, modify himself for each recipient. Second of all, it's Saviv, that he's even higher, that he doesn't have to modify himself. He just shines equally. The level of light into the world is all the same. And the third level is that in truth, we're so tiny and so small in the big picture. Like some of those videos we once spoke about, where you see, Earth compared to the entire solar system, compared to the galaxies, and you realize at some point that two little people standing on Earth really are not very significant in the entire giant universe that exists. You're not even seeing. You can't even see Earth on this level. You can't even see our galaxy. So it just shows you a level of how small. Remind ourselves, this is all, by the way, within the universe. Okay. So what's the meditation? Just to see it inside to wrap this up. The meditation is that you recognize that even Male and Seiviv and the concept of Kulei Kamei Chashiv, all of us are like so insignificant and so non-existent compared to the great grandness of God. And he gives a metaphor. He gives a metaphor that we used a couple times in Tanya, and he uses it again here. When someone speaks a word, that word that comes out of us is one of literally millions and millions of words we will speak in our lifetime. So in the big scheme of our entire speech of 120 years of existence, one word is nothing, literally nothing, especially if it was a word that was spoken randomly, not a word that was like, I do. Someone says I do under the chuppah, so to speak, that's words that I remembered. We're talking about one of many words. Now, speech in general is very, very insignificant compared to thought. Because you can't compare, if you have a feeling, whether it's an emotional feeling or an intellectual idea inside you, you can't compare the way you express it. Words can't fully articulate what you're thinking and what you're feeling. That means words in general are so small compared to thought. Thought is very small compared to the origin of thought, meaning the way thought is in its earliest form, before it comes into ideas, is a power of thought. And then get to how it is in the power of the soul, my true identity, comes out that if you compare one insignificant word said out of 120 years compared to my true identity, that word is nothing. That's what Hashem did. Hashem said, let there be light, let there be this. All of creation is just a couple of words uttered by God that is above time and above place. So it's an insignificant, non-existent entity. Or like comparing one thought, one word compared to how things are in the origin of my thinking process, or how a thought is compared to the origin of my feelings. So in other words, we're saying that in the end of the day, we're very small compared to this very great God. But where is this whole process starting from? Me. I'm here, bigger than me, and God is even bigger. In other words, I'm developing a relationship to God starting from Olam, starting from world, which is fine, but it's a lower level. This relationship with God, when someone thinks about this properly, you'll immediately start changing your perspective. What does that mean? A regular person who has a love, let it be a chocolate, let it be a nice car, let it be a nice pair of shoes, let it be whatever the thing might be, that attraction, that joy, that love, that feeling is really, in our lives, very special. Someone who really enjoys a pair of shoes, it's a very big deal. Someone who enjoys nice meals, it's a big deal. Someone enjoys even a higher level, let's say spiritually, I enjoy art or music, that's already a more advanced type of love and pleasure. But all those things are materialistic pursuits. When a person starts realizing, you know what, there's something much bigger than myself. It's the difference. It's like imagine if a child who really enjoys Laffy Taffies or Dum Dums or candy never advanced beyond it. And at the age of 40, he realizes 1 second. There's something bigger than Dum Dums and bigger than candy and bigger than red balloons or blue balloons. There's something called electronics, there's devices, there's art. Meaning, there's a point you realize 1 second I was caught up with all this stuff. And that metaphor, if we start realizing how grand God is, how great God is, our pleasures, and if we do this properly, could be transformed from being attracted to chocolate cake or shoes or a nice car to a meaningful relationship with God. We can understand it easily when it comes to a relationship with a person. You can't compare someone who has an attraction and appreciation for an item compared to a loved one, a spouse. When you have a close friend or a spouse, that love can't be, what do you love more, like chicken or your wife? It's a silly question. Why? Because chicken doesn't hold it, even though chicken is good, don't get me wrong. Good prepared chicken, it's perfect. But you can't compare it to the love of a family member. Let's go a step higher, love of God. In other words, if someone truly appreciates what God is, not just a bunch of words, but what God is, it's like what? And I'm attracted to like a good piece of meat, and I'm attracted to a materialistic pursuit. This way, your love will be transformed from a love of something silly and meaningless. And he's not saying you shouldn't enjoy your coffee. You shouldn't have an enjoyment of the coffee, but the love and the passion needs to be directed at something bigger. If the love, imagine the person says, listen, what's wrong if I love coffee? He said, I don't love my wife. I love my coffee more than my wife. That's odd. But if you are able to realize, one second, if I have an appreciation of something which is a temporary joy that lasts about 12 minutes, and then it's gone, and then I just have to deal later with the calories, how about something which is meaningful? So our nature, because we have a thinking soul and a natural vital soul, wouldn't have to be convinced, and someone has to tell us, hey, you should consider loving your spouse. You should consider loving your children. Because that's how Hashem designed us. That's part of a love of our natural love. But loving something which is not physical, that doesn't come naturally. Even though we have it deep in our soul, the ability and the pull to that direction, it's not a natural feeling. Naturally, Hashem designed us, we're attracted to things that are material, that give us pleasure physically, that are attractive physically, and that's how we are. No one has to give you say, you know what? You should consider liking potato chips. No one has to give you a class and say, I'll tell you why you should like it. They're crunchy. They have like a salty texture to them and a nice flavor. And when you bite them, actually your mouth fills up with a great flavor. It feels good. And the crunching sound in your ears is good too. And if it's really good, and no one has to do that because it's natural. Unfortunately, we don't always see that when it comes to things that are much greater and grander, like healthy food. If someone tells you, you know what, you have some issues with cholesterol or high blood pressure, or your other issues in healthy, you have other health issues, you should consider. So unless you consider it seriously, and if you do seriously consider it, you'll start realizing, you know what, I don't enjoy potato chips anymore. They're killing me. The salt is bad for my blood pressure, and the fat and the saturated fats are bad for my cholesterol, and it's bad for me. I suddenly don't enjoy it anymore. You know what I enjoy? A crispy pepper. I enjoy some cucumbers. I enjoy some green tea or whatever it is. What happens is our minds start telling us that something else is no long-term better. Yes, the instant pleasure of a good potato chip is very enjoyable for those 4 or 5 seconds of eating it. But truthfully, that's not going to make me happy. Happy will be if I live another 5, 10, 12, 20 years and I'm in good health and I can walk and I can go to my grandchildren's weddings. That is really ultimate happiness. But that takes working on yourself to see there's something bigger. But there's something bigger than that too, and that's God. But that takes meditation. That's what we're saying here. In order to truly develop a love, just like we're naturally pulled to very materialistic and corporal and material attractions, but truth to be told, there's something much greater than that. There's an absolutely fascinating mimer of the Rebbe Rashab. Rebbe Rashab explains, he says, what's the greatest pleasure in this world today, society? It's the intimacy, sexuality, that pleasure that the man and a woman come together. That is the greatest attraction and pleasure today. And he says, why is it that way? Why does that happen? He says, because to create a child, the seed that comes and the other process, the whole process of creating a child needs to draw down from the highest levels of Chachma Da'atzilus. It actually, one of the reasons why it says wasting seed is such a big deal, in some religions, they think it's because it feels good or it's a pleasure. That's not the fact. That's not the reason. The reason why wasting seed is such a big sin in Jewish tradition is because you're taking such a lofty, great resource and you're wasting it for what it could be used for. It's made to have a relationship with your spouse and to be creative in families, etc. But you're basically taking a real valuable high resource and wasting it. So what's the real reason why the pleasure is so great in intimacy? The pleasure is great because you're reaching to the essence of your soul, the chachma, the essence, the highest pinnacle of your soul is being woken up. Meaning, when are you alive? When do you feel good? When your soul's alive. When your real pleasure is coming alive. The opposite of pleasure is being a sloth, like wet noodles. You're lying there. Actual pleasure it's a pumped up excitement that comes from your soul being awakened. Says the Rebbe Rashab, how foolish is it that we're using something that draws a little tiny bit from the source to get pumped up and excited instead of tapping into our actual source, the actual source, which is Torah. What taps into this chachma, this deep level of which is the source of pleasure, greater? The act of intimacy, which is a sub reality that comes from this chachma, this high level of the soul, or learning some Torah, doing some mitzvahs that actually taps into the essence of our soul in a much more direct fashion. In other words, we find something fascinating, that true happiness in the person doesn't come from indulging in pleasures. Because as much as the pleasure will come at some point tapping into your inner self where I'm feeling good, it doesn't last because it was such a dumbed down version of the inside of your soul. Whereas if you tap into Torah and mitzvahs, find a person that did a mitzvah, helped somebody out. At the end of the day, you look back. Which one do you look back with satisfaction? The person who might have done a sin doesn't say, wow, I am so happy this morning I did that sin. That's guilt. They don't feel good. Especially Jewish people, we have guilt built into our system, where it's pre-installed. But the true pleasure comes. You know what? Today, I got up, I davened, I helped somebody out. You fall asleep with a relaxed serenity, a smile, because you tap into the real soul, undiluted way. Says Rabbi Rashab, all our physical pleasures they're pleasures, but they're coming in such a limited fashion. If we had some wisdom, we would tap into our pleasures where the real pleasure is. It's not a dum-dum or a Laffy Taffy or a red balloon. Go step up a notch where the ultimate pleasure is getting a relationship with God's commandments, God's Torah, and God himself. Okay, so he says, what's the lower level of love? We're saying this comes from recognizing the greatness of God over us in Mamali, in Seviv, and of course, the highest level where we really don't take up any place on the scale. And he says, what would be the result of that? It would be the result now he says something amazing. If you come to this place, not only will you lose your interest, meaning your full passion for dum-dums, Laffy Taffies, candies, or nice steak, coffees, or pair of shoes, you'll also stop being so attracted to spiritual pleasures. What does that mean? On a low level, spiritual pleasure means art, music, things that are not physical and tangible, like the pleasure you have from someone who has a pleasure from art, someone who has a pleasure from music. It's not physical, it's spiritual. It's a very lofty type of pleasure. The rabbis of Chabad explain that there are various levels of pleasure. Art and music are considered, and then higher than that is even ideas. Some people it's poetry, some people it's studying math, science. There's a brilliant joy in accomplishing and figuring out things. But there's also a spiritual pleasure you're going to have. It's still about self. I want to reach to some spiritual lofty level. On that relationship with God, if it's something I want to experience, it's still very centered about me. I want to experience something. It might be a very lofty thing. It might be that I want to experience the beauty of God, the Garden of Eden. It might be I want to experience the beauty of some spiritual revelation of angels or souls. But at the end of the day, it's still something I want to experience. The ultimate form, when I'm no longer thinking about me, but I'm thinking about something bigger than myself. The joy of, it's almost like, by the way, a parent whose greatest joy is seeing their kids happy. What do you get from that? Someone might say to you, what do you get from that? Did you have a good pizza? Did you have a cookie? Did you have, no. Watching my child be happy, that's the greatest joy. Meaning, I'm not happy because I'm getting something. I'm happy because the one that I love is whole, is serene, is happy. That is a much, much loftier love than all the loves that you might get. Sometimes you'll pay for it. Sometimes you give up a lot of years of hard work just to have your loved one, child, or parent, or someone that you're close to, just that they should have a smile and be happy. Because there, it's true. It's around me. It's my child. Good. That's why it's not a higher level of love. It's a lower level of love. But it's the highest part of this lower level of love, where it's so much not about my satisfaction, but the love of something that means a lot to me. The love of that alone. Shall kol hatainig b'shkulim b'teilim b'metzias klei mamish kamech shivi. Ve'ein arech v'dimin klal b'neim chas v'shalom. And he says, because all the pleasures and all the enjoyments of the world are nothing compared to God. And he's going to use now a very interesting metaphor or expression. I'll say it outside first and explain it, then I'll say it inside. He says, because all of the pleasures of the world, the dum-dums, the taffies, the red balloons, the colorful balloons, all the pleasures of the world are like nothing compared to infinity. Now, what's so unique about the statement? There's two, so to speak, let's call it quantum leaps. There are two giant leaps in numbers. The first giant leap is from 0 to 1. When you go from 0 to 1, it's not like 1 is much more than 0. It's an infinite number more than 0. Why? Because even if you take a million zeros or a billion zeros or a trillion zeros, you're still only going to have 0. Once you go to 1, you're changing completely. It's an infinite amount more, meaning you can't take a bunch of nothings and make something. All the zeros in the world won't make even number 1. So therefore, from going 0 to 1 is a quantum infinite leap. The same thing, going from a trillion or a billion, from any number to infinity. We know that one of the concepts we explain often in Hasidus, the number 1 and the number 600 trillion are the same exact distance from infinity. It's not like 600 billion is closer to infinity. No, 600 billion and the number 1 are both infinitely distant from infinity, because infinity is infinity and a number is a number. What's the difference between 1 and 600 billion? How many times you have 1? 600 billion is just 600 billion ones. So to go from a number to infinity is also an infinite leap, a quantum leap. The Alter Rebbe uses expression here is going from 0 to infinity. It's a double leap, meaning not just from 0 to 1 or from a billion to infinity. From 0 to infinity is a double leap, so to speak. And he says that's the difference between us and our pleasures and godly pleasures. I remember growing up, people talk about when Mashiach comes, it says our main interest will be to study Torah. Our main interest will be to be close to God. We're not going to be so interested in food or money, etc. So I remember we were talking with our teacher, and he said, we told him, I don't understand. Why is that an attraction? You're telling me I'm going to lose all my enjoyment in the world? To me, it doesn't sound attractive at all. Imagine someone, he says, when Mashiach comes, you're no longer going to want electronics, no longer good chicken, no longer good coffee, no longer, a nice, comfortable car. All you're going to want is godliness. Okay, I'm not interested anymore. So he told me, imagine you tell a child who's 3 years old, when you get older, you're not going to be attracted anymore to dum-dums or to Laffy Taffies or red balloons. You're going to want bigger things like electronics, like bonds, like investments. The kid says, who wants to grow up? I don't want to lose my... Meaning, we're living in such a world of caught up in our own tunnel vision that we think a child of 2 or 3 years old thinks the whole world surrounds about dum-dums. And if I lose that interest, who wants to grow up and have cameras and cars? Who needs it? So you give a kid a choice of a bicycle or $1 million cash. He wants the bicycle. Who needs $1 million? Am I going to do paper? So the same idea is we sometimes or often or basically can see all the attractions of a godly relationship because we're thinking like a child. If we're able to get past that tunnel vision of being attracted to materialistic things and realize how limited they are compared to the ultimate joy and absolute bliss of what's joy in our life? It's the soul inside of us somehow being tickled and enjoyed. What our spirit, our soul, our identity, our neshama gets tickled by a good experience, by a good joke, by a good friend, by a nice walk in the sunset. If we can realize that that's only what we call candies compared to the ultimate joy that a soul could have, and that's what he's telling us here. If we would realize how big God is, how big God is, tell the child how big you can go to Best Buy. You think you have a dum-dum here? Look at Best Buy. Look at the real estate market. Look at the islands you could have. It's come and start seeing what the big world out there. We're telling it's like the famous metaphor we said many times about a child who's in his mother's womb, and we tell him you're going to go out soon. I don't want to go out, but there's so much out there. I'm comfortable where I am. I don't want to leave. I have my things. I have. Who wants to go into some imaginative world where there's all the other stuff out there? We're living in a cocoon that we can't realize. There's so much the real world to get there, and that is the mission of this meditation, to try and let us know not that it's so much bigger and therefore I can't relate to it. No, it's so much bigger, and whatever in this life makes me happy is just a small little minuscule representation of the things that could really make me happy, what really matters, what's really joyful. I say one of the sad meditations a person should have is when you have or don't have something or family, imagine, God forbid, a person has 6 hours to live. What is the most valuable thing to you right now? Is it your laptop? Is it what's the most meaningful? If you can spend some time with one thing, it's suddenly we're putting aside all the distractions and foolishnesses of the world and what we think makes us happy, what really makes us happy. And this is, again, it's a very advanced meditation because it forces us to reevaluate everything that we used to make us happy. But he's telling us it's something much bigger than that. And he's trying to show us a way to love. It's a brilliant brilliant meditation, but it's so difficult to get to without effort and without spending time realizing, they say the word eternal. It's something we always say. I heard a friend of mine talking a while ago. He said, Torah is eternal. So one way to say something is eternal is that it goes on forever. It's forever. That doesn't mean anything to me. Torah is forever. If Torah is eternal, therefore it applies today. Meaning the Torah is not eternal that it goes on forever. Torah is eternal that applies today. Meaning the idea is to take these lofty levels of godliness and something bigger than ourselves and relate to it and make it personal. And then we'll finish off today with one more interesting idea, which will actually, to me, it actually helps complete the thought. And he says one more thing. He says, until now we're saying, what's the mission of love? To take the love and that attraction we have from material pursuits and redirect that love to spiritual pursuits. Spiritual, let's not even call it pursuits, spiritual pleasures, spiritual enjoyments. He says, what about a person that has no joy in life? What does that mean? There are generally two types of personalities in the Hasidic understanding. There's what's called intellectual people and emotional people. Emotional people need people around them and need to be always involved with something to feel good. Intellectual people need nothing. They can sit themselves in a room for 20 years and they're happy. They're just thinking about stuff. They're thinking math, they're thinking science. They're on an island themselves. They don't even know it. They're happier. They like the quarantine. I can stay home. It don't bothers me. Emotional people have a tremendous enjoyment of experiences. You see the passion on them much more. They're called fire. Emotions like a fire. Intellect is considered cold. It's cold. It's disconnected. It's not emotional. Even a person who doesn't naturally have a pleasure in this world. There are some people that don't have. I'm not interested in pleasures. I don't need a car. I don't need good food. I'm happy with bread that's a day old and a little bit of mayonnaise on it or butter or nothing, and I'm happy. And it's not because I'm not a good guy. I don't have pleasures. He says even someone who doesn't have pleasures can be woken up to have pleasure for godliness. Meaning it's not only someone who has a pleasure for material pursuits to redirect that. It's also a way to wake up and to ignite a feeling and a love and a passion in someone who you don't see it. Let's just do this inside, and then we'll stop here for today. So he says, there's no comparison between the love that a person has to material things and a love for God. Like there's no comparison between zero and nothing compared to the ultimate internal life. As I gave before the metaphors, I said from zero to infinity. Who is for me in heaven, meaning I just want you. This is taken from the famous quote from the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe was famous for saying a quote, and he would not just say it once, it was said many times. God, I don't want your Garden of Eden. I don't want your higher Garden of Eden, your lower one. I just want you. It's like a kid who tells his parents who's very wealthy, God, I don't want your money. I don't want your house. Don't, kid wants to spend time with his dad. I'm very busy here. Go take a car. I'm very busy. I just want you. Don't give me money. Don't give me a house. Don't give me all your butlers. I just want you, God. And that's a whole different relationship. I don't need all this, I once saw a very sad thing where this kid goes to his dad and he asks him how much he makes an hour because his dad's never home. And the story basically is that the kid saved that money to buy 1 hour of his dad's time. Meaning I want you. All the things you give me are great, but I want you. It's a very lofty expression where you recognize the advanced relationship that could be there. One of the stories told about this is the Baal Shem Tov once gave a blessing to a woman to have children. And he got in big trouble for this in heaven. Why? In heaven, it was decreed this woman should never have children. And he gave a blessing. And God has a rule. When a tzaddik makes a decree, he will go and fulfill the decree. Now, this woman had a child. So he was informed by an angel. He said, you should know that in heaven, they're very disappointed you gave this woman a blessing who couldn't have a child, and you changed the material makeup of her body, and you changed everything. You moved the heavens and earth to give her a child, and your punishment is you lost your share in the world to come. So Baal Shem Tov smiled and said, thank God. He said, until now, you could think that I'm serving God and I'm relating to God because I'm going to get a reward one day. Now I'm not getting paid for it. God, it's just about you now. There's no more. It's like, someone tells you, I'm going to pay you to spend time with me. That's not. Now I'm not paying you to spend time with God. It's a volunteer work. In other words, the relationship was no longer about the reward. And it says because of that, he got the reward back. he ended up earning back the Garden of Eden, etc. But the bottom line is, it's a relationship which is something much bigger than self. It's the ultimate. It's a relationship with your child and with your parent, and not with all the things he can provide you with. While we appreciate it, we appreciate all the things God provides us with. We appreciate it very much. By the way, just to before we go further, just to mention something beautiful in the parsha, I just reminded myself. In this week's parsha, we have a very interesting statement. We have, after the story of Avraham, when he goes and prays for Sodom to be saved. The cities of Sodom were terrible sinners. They were very, not just against God, but more importantly, they were sinners against each other. And God decided to destroy the city. And we know that Avraham prays for them. After he so to speak, fails, he besides saving his nephew Lot and his family, after his failure, so to speak, next morning it says, Vayashkem Avram Abaker. Avram woke up in the morning. And Vayashkem, the commentaries tell us, refers to davening Shachris. Vayashkem, he got up in the morning and he davened Shachris. So what's interesting is we have Vayashkem Avram Abaker teaches us Shachris. We have by Yitzchak, it says, L'suach basada, to speak in the field, and that teaches us Mincha. And Yaakov, it says, Vayifka b'makom, you reach it by sunset, and it says that teaches us Ma'ariv. So the three of the forefathers, but the three forefathers, they teach us Shachris, Mincha, and Ma'ariv. Avram and Shachris, etc. The question asked is, by Yitzchak it says L'suach. L'suach means to speak. So it makes sense how it teaches us about prayer. By Yaakov it says Vayifka. Vayifka, in addition to meaning to meet, it also means to beseech, to request. Like, stop begging me. He was asking. Vayashkem doesn't mean, it just means he woke up. Where do you see there the idea of prayer? So it says in the writings of the rabbis, Vayashkem means he woke up the love inside of him. Prayer is a time of love. As we'll see and discover more and more in the Tanya, the time of love where we could relate to God is prayer. We have the whole davening is all about the relationship. As we'll see, we get close to this, particularly the Shema. Shema Yisrael, v'yahavta, you should love the Lord your God. And we have before the Shema, the blessings is Avas Olam, the exactly what we're talking about now. So Ava, it's a Vayashke, means Avram is reminding us and bequeathing to us to be able to wake up that love to daven. Vayashkem, so we have inside of us this feeling. It's not some abstract concept. It takes effort to wake it up. It doesn't wake up on its own. Except we'll see in a moment at the end of the chapter, in very rare cases, Hashem will wake it up on its own. But in general, it takes effort to meditate and think and recognize, remind yourself, no different from a child that's disconnected a bit from the parent. While it's true, they got into a disconnect for whatever reason, the child has to think to themselves and understand, who am I? Who is my parent? What happened to me? Wake up that love. But the love you're waking up is something that's really there before. The love, even though it takes effort to wake it up, it's not creating something new. It's waking up, unlike a husband or wife, that it's a brand new love. When it comes to a mother and a child, you don't have to create the love. You have to remind yourself and encourage yourself. And the parent doesn't have to remind themselves to love the child. The child has to remind themselves to love the parent. And this is really what we're talking about here. This Avas Eilam, by understanding our relationship. Who is mom? Who is dad? And to get to that place, that is the meditation here. Just to finish off, even a person that doesn't have any natural love or passion or enjoyment of any material or even spiritual pursuit, he doesn't like cake and he doesn't like music. He's no interest in it. He also he could not only wake up his love, he can get a roaring, flaming fire. As you mentioned, Ava Rabba, the higher love, is like cool, pleasurable waters. The lower love is like a passion, like a feeling you have when a husband and wife have not been together because they're out of town for 6 months and they come back together. That passion that comes together, that's what we're talking about here. It's the love that comes from yearning to become closer. We're distant and we want to become closer. That could be not just ignited, but also become a roaring fire, even the person that thinks he has no feelings. There's benefits, and now by thinking the above. So meditation, what we're saying here is also bringing out a very important point. We'll close with this. And that is not to forget that the proper path to emotions in life as a Jew has to come first thinking and then emotions. When we talk about, take a minute for this. When we talk about the animal soul, if you remember back in the beginning of Tanya, the animal soul first functions with emotion and then intellect. What does it mean? I like this. Now I'll give you a reason why I like this. I hate this person. Let me tell you now, I'll come up with reasons why I hate them. Meaning the animal soul first thinks of emotions, and then it follows up with intellect. You end up having your thought biased for all that which you want and don't want. You'll convince yourself why it's wise to stay up tonight, why it's wise to have a relationship with this person, even though it's not good for you. And you convince yourself all the things because emotions came first. And that pulls your intellect to believe it, to follow it, to convince yourself. And by the way, it's true in politics too. We like a certain party, and then we convince ourselves why we like them, usually. The real way to do it is to have intellect first, to see all the options in front of you, and to ask yourself, what is the wisest thing? Coming to school now, there are kids who are involved with studying, kids that are good-natured, the kids who are bullies, kids involved with the drugs. Who should I be friends with? And then you develop a relationship based on intellect. What we're telling you right here is that the proper path is not to start with emotion, but start with meditation. Meditation is what brings emotion. If you think about somebody, how much they embarrassed you last year by a business meeting, you will start getting emotionally upset and start hating them. And if you think about how kind somebody was to your grandparents or to your parents in Russia or in Poland during the war, you'll start thinking how fortunate you are and how much you wish you could do something for them and thank them. Which means meditation guarantees you to bring out results. And that's really, as it comes to see Shema and all davening, the way to come to a feeling in davening or a feeling in a relationship with Hashem is meditation. The path to a relationship is thinking and thinking and thinking about something. And therefore, even if you have what you think is, I am dead inside of me. The Haftorah this week, by the way, is I don't have time to go into it now. Maybe next week, if I remember, I'll talk about it. Is one of the most beautiful messages about this, where the woman comes to the Avadia, the prophet, and says, my husband died. And the word for husband is also the same word as fire. And he said, my fire died. I lost my interest. I have no interest in love of God, fear of God. And Avadia tells her how to get it back. He said,